I say to you, I tell you, a tornado, I say a tornado, that's a terrible thing, a terrible thing.
Here was a guy who was as handsome as they come, as macho as they come, as sexual and appealing to women as they come.
He had an innate sense of what was right for him, how he could do something different the next time. A remarkable man, just a brilliant gift from God he had, and a man who handled it beautifully without going off the deep end or losing it. He was in charge of himself.
I'm gonna do them like they mean to do me.
He was ahead of his time. He's practically a prototype for the modern actor. He started his own production company, Hector Lancaster. He took risks. He worked for independent features. He did foreign features. He did what interested him.
Love and affection is what I got to offer on hot or cold days in this lonely old world. I got nothing else.
Anybody who looks at the films knows who Burt Lancaster is. He's a combination of all of those characters.
The body of Burt Lancaster's work is really a tribute to an actor who simply refused to ever be pressed into any particular mold. There's a constant striving to do one more performance, to be one more guy that he hasn't been yet. A constant striving to stretch the envelope, to change and to grow.
I know that my roots come from my upbringing. My mother was a very strong disciplinarian and a big, powerful woman. She weighed about 250 pounds and stood about 5'9". And she used to have an expression when we did something. She'd say, "Shut up or I'll jump down your throat."
Burt was actually the youngest child of the Lancaster family. He grew up in East Harlem, which is a neighborhood in the upper part of Manhattan that at that time was largely populated by Italian immigrants. His mother and father were Irish by descent. They were poor. It was a difficult childhood. He had to go out and hold boys' jobs like many kids in that period, shoveling snow, shining shoes, whatever he could do.
The settlement house was a great place for the kids to go. They offered classes for kids, after-school programs, and Burt said if it hadn't been for the settlement house, who knows, he could have ended up, committing crimes or something, he said, because the settlement house gave him something to do. He went there and he went to the library. He said he was an avid reader.
Burt met Nick Cravat when he was about 12 years old. Nick was a street kid, a little kid, about 5'2" at his maturity. And he was feisty. He was like a little pit bull. And so you had this odd combination of Burt, who could be quite gentle at times, and this feisty little Nick.
My dad and Burt were both opera lovers, so my grandmother was also, and so she had a bunch of Enrico Caruso albums, and so she would play the albums, and the kids and her would all listen.
He also had his first exposure to the theater there, but he was not interested at all in acting as a kid. He thought that was sissy stuff.
He graduated high school at 16 and went on to college with a basketball scholarship and was bored.
Interestingly, it was at the Union Settlement House that he met an Australian acrobat by the name of Curly Brent. He saw Curly one day doing his workout at the Union Settlement House gym and said, "Boy, that's great stuff. Do you think you could teach me some of it?" And Curly took him under his wing and gave him a foundation as an acrobat.
And the next thing you know, brought my dad around, and my dad was small and strong, and he also used to box, so he, was real coordinated. So the two of them started to learn all this circus acrobatics, and they became great friends, the three of them. They made their own bars, and they worked and they practiced. And then they got an act together and then found an ad in a paper for the K Brothers Circus. And they wrote a letter to K Brothers offering their act, and they called themselves Lang and Cravat. Their parents chipped in. My grandmother, my father's mother, chipped in $50 or so, and then Burt's father chipped in about $50. And they got this car, they drove it down there, and then they showed up, and there they were. And they were hired, and that's how the circus life began.
In 1940, Burt injured his arm, and he had to retire from the circus for a while, and he didn't really know what he wanted to do. In Chicago, he took a series of odd jobs. He worked, for example, as a salesman at Montgomery Ward, and he worked in various other rather menial jobs while he tried to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. And before he really had settled upon something, World War II intervened.
I met Burt Lancaster for the very first time, World War II in Italy, and he was with the 21st Special Service Unit. When they used to entertain us, we used to watch Burt do some tricks on the trapeze and also get involved with various skits and sketches. The next time I saw him was in New York when he had just come off a play, Sound of Hunting, and he played a sergeant.
Well, when I got out of the Army in 1945, I quite accidentally met a man in an elevator who asked me if I was an actor. And as I said to him, yes, I'm a dumb actor. Dumb actor is an expression we use in a circus for when you don't talk, you just do an act.
He was going to visit a girlfriend, Norma, who later became his wife. And then as it turns out, the guy said, hey, would you be interested in reading for a part? You look like the perfect, what we're looking for, the perfect look.
And the part was not a very big part, but what he did impressed a lot of people. And so Hollywood got interested in him.
The star of A Sound of Hunting was Sam Levine, who was a well-known New York actor at that point. And Sam kind of took Burt under his wing. Burt had a number of studio offers, but what was he going to do? He was really a novice in the field. And Sam said, well, the first thing you need to do is get an agent. And he began to introduce Burt to appropriate parties. One of them was named Harold Hecht. And Hecht said to Lancaster, look, I'm not the biggest agent that you're going to be meeting with, but you would be a very important client to me. I won't eat unless you eat, and I guarantee I'll get you jobs. He also said something to Burt that was even more intriguing. He said, if you're going to be the star that I think you're going to be, within 5 years, we can be making our own movies as producers. And for Lancaster, that had enormous appeal.
Once Burt had signed with Harold Hecht, Hecht immediately signed him up with Hal Wallace because he wanted to ensure an income, and Wallace was great at signing up people like Kirk Douglas and any number of other ones.
Wallace said, you give me 2 pictures a year for 7 years, and you can do any other projects that you want.
Harold knew about Mark Hellinger's The Killers. Burt impressed him. He got one of the leads in The Killers, and now they were in business. Because amazingly, you see that one film made him a star.
If there's a single thread in the career of Burt Lancaster, it may well be the notion that nobody was going to tell him what to do. Lancaster was going to be his own man. And this was a remarkable notion for an actor to have in 1945 when Burt started in the movies. Lancaster's first independent production was Kiss the Blood Off My Hands, which was a rather dark choice for him to make, given the fact that he wanted to break away from the dark movies that Hal Wallace put him in.
Did you rob or kill someone?
That's what they think. What have I done to you?
I killed him.
In the 40s, Lancaster was primarily seen as a tough guy. He was playing a series of inarticulate, physically constricted, vulnerable but hardened men. He wanted to tap other sides of his persona. And every time something came along where he could kind of break out of that mold, he had to struggle with Hal Wallace to allow him to do it. The first opportunity came with All My Sons, a play by Arthur Miller, in which he really showed himself as a very endearing, typically normal young guy in love with a young woman.
When we got around to making films, the one that really was tailor-made for Burt was The Flame and the Arrow, and for the first time, Burt took truly an active part because he staged all of the physical scenes himself.
Burt was very impulsive, and he had a lot of energy, and he was always kind of bouncing around. We had this scene, this love scene, where he had been arguing and fighting with these noblemen, and he was angered, and he pulled me to him so forcefully that he hurt my arms. So I went home that night with these bruises on my arm, and my husband didn't know what had happened. But it was because of Burt.
Eventually, when Burt made it to Hollywood and really started getting parts and getting known and everything, then that's when he talked my dad into coming to Hollywood. So my dad packed up the house and the wife, and from Indiana and out to Hollywood he went. He didn't have any acting experience, so they were nervous about giving him lines. So my dad said something like he talked his head off, and they gave him the role of a mute. So he kind of talked himself, I guess, out of speaking.
He and Nick Cravat were wonderful to watch. They were so cute together.
This is the type of industry where you don't always get an honest answer. And Burt, particularly, could always count on my dad to just be right off the cuff with him, and he wouldn't mince words, he wouldn't pull his punches. And sometimes, Burt would get insulted, and they'd get in a fight, and they'd argue, but they were like brothers.
And all of a sudden, instead of this heavy, brooding, slow-moving, bottled-up kind of Burt Lancaster persona, which people had been used to at that time, you got a guy who was light and buoyant and acrobatic and smiled all the time. People today who think of those incredible teeth, that had its real start with The Flame and the Arrow. It really gave Burt a whole different persona, a whole different side of himself. And remarkably, throughout all of the rest of the decades of his career, he kept that persona and the original persona, that sort of hunkered down man of control, sort of side by side, and would take the two of them out and interchangeably use them as the pictures demand.
You are charged with desertion, theft, shanghaiing sailors, willful destruction of private property, scandalous conduct with a certain South Sea woman.
Oh, Sarge.
All we need is a preacher and a motel.
Burt loved to direct. The second movie I made with Burt, he practically directed Chuck Connors, because Chuck was new. This was his first picture, and Burt knew it, and he was about to take over Chuck and his performance because he felt he could guide him.
What are you doing here?
I'm on my honeymoon. I'm on his honeymoon, too.
Destroyer! She's closing in!
He was always off in the corner with Chuck, telling him what to do. And I'm sure the real director was a little miffed at it, but I don't think he said anything.
Burt was a very demanding, tough guy. You had to know what you were doing to work with him. He didn't have any patience with you if you didn't know exactly what you wanted and what you were doing. And he was a very intimidating guy to argue with.
Along the way, Burt saw that if he was going to get parts that were any good at all, he had better be in a position to play opposite people like Shirley Booth.
For Burt Lancaster to be cast in this role was so unusual. It was so against any type casting that you could ever imagine. I won a nomination for the movie. Shirley Booth won an Academy Award, but to me, the one who deserved it the most was Burt Lancaster.
Can I carry those for you?
They're not heavy. I can manage.
I guess it would look silly, a man my age carrying your books.
A lot of men your age go to school.
Do they really?
Well, I guess you've had your share of college.
He was playing a middle-aged man. Now, it's much easier to go to old because you can get makeup, or to even younger because they can shoot you through gauze. But to play this middle-aged former drunk, it was the most unusual casting in the whole world.
Now, Hal Wallace originally wanted Humphrey Bogart for the role, and Bogart would have been just about perfect for it, but it was not to be. And once again, Burt had to go to Wallace and really fight for Wallace to even consider him.
You didn't think I knew about it, did you? I heard him sneaking in there that night. I saw them.
You knew about it all the time, and you thought you were putting something over on me.
No, I didn't, Doc. I didn't know anything about it, honestly.
And you're crazy if you think I didn't know. You're running a regular Lonely Hearts place. It's probably been going on for years, ever since we were married.
No, it's not true, Doc.
You're lying!
No, Daddy! Daddy, please! No, Doc! Daddy!
Well, none of that's gonna happen anymore. I'm gonna fix you now. Once and for all!
No, Doc! Don't do this to me, Daddy! Daddy! Doc, it's me! Lola!
He was so versatile. He could do, when he did From Here to Eternity, I was bowled over because he was so strong.
Nobody's gonna do nothing. Anybody does any killing around here, I'll do it. Okay, fatso. It's killing you want. Come on.
She's nothing but trouble. You better keep your mind off what you're thinking. What do you want to do, wind up in Leavenworth?
The single most often shown scene from Burt Lancaster's career is, of course, the beach scene, From Here to Eternity. It took 3 days to actually film that scene because they had to time the waves in such a way that it would work. The director originally had in mind that the two of them would kiss standing on the sand. Well, when the producer, Buddy Adler, saw it in rehearsal, he said, well, you know, this is terrible. It doesn't have enough spice. And Burt said, well, we actually rehearsed it another way. Would you mind if we showed that to you?
Strangely enough, it took us a long time. We found it very hard to strike the right kind of note and balance in the piece. And we had to do it over and over and over before we got it. And of course, another reason we did it over and over again is because we rather enjoyed it.
I never knew it could be like this. Nobody ever kissed me the way you do.
Looks like we tied up with the wrong outfit.
When I think about Burt and his desire to find a role on the screen, the picture that comes immediately to mind is Vera Cruz. Heck kept looking for somebody to play the villain in the piece. I had done 25 or 30 pages, and I knew they were pretty good, and on the strength of them, Harold got Gary Cooper to play the hero, and I didn't know who to look for, really, for the villain. I talked to Burt at great lengths about a favorite phrase of mine, villainy is moonlight, and that's playing heroes that are villains. And then one day Burt said to me, he said, why don't I play the villain? I began to think of him playing the part, and a script not finished. God, I began to tailor it. This, to me, was my dream, was to have a villain that we fall in love with.
Countess, you're beginning to talk my language.
It was in Vera Cruz, as I say, that he came full blossom. Amongst women, Burt had a monumental fascination. And when people talked of him being like a caged lion, any number of women said how much they'd like to be in that cage with him. I fell so much in love with him myself, just watching him on the screen, that I went to Cooper and said, I'm not going to kill Burt in the picture, Cooper. He's just too likable. And Cooper said, when I agreed to do it, the agreement was that I kill Burt. I won't finish the picture unless I kill him. So I said to Burt, I told him this. Burt said, look, quit worrying about it, Jimmy. That's okay with me. For God's sakes, he can kill me.
Burt never played the movie star. He never played that game. He socially was rarely ever seen out with other performers. He was always behind the scenes, and his brilliance as an actor, I think, was an innate gift. He challenged himself with everything he did. He had to be challenged.
After Come Back, Little Sheba, he just stepped out all the time and took roles, whether they were like him or not. I know with John Wayne and most actors, John Wayne used to say to me, well, that's not a John Wayne role. But there was no such role for Burt Lancaster. He would jump into new waters and was daring like he was on the trapeze. He dared try anything, and he did.
I'm hoping to meet some sensible older lady, you know? I don't care if she's a little bit too plump or not such a stylish dresser. The important thing in a lady is understanding, good sense, you know?
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a nice, well-furnished house and a profitable little business of some kind.
I see. And such a lady with a well-furnished house and business. What does she want with a man with 3 dependents and the purchase and the beer habit, plays the number? Oh, my.
Love and affection in a world that's lonely and cold.
Yeah, it might be lonely, but I would not say cold on this particular day.
Love and affection is what I got to offer on hot or cold days in this lonely old world. I got nothing else. Mangiacavallo has nothing.
Who?
Me, Alvaro Mangiacavallo.
Ah, yeah.
You know, Mangiacavallo means eat a horse. You know this. But I don't have a horse to eat, not even a chicken. I'm the grandson of the village idiot of Riveri.
Oh, I see you like to make jokes.
No joke, davvero. He chased my grandmother in a flooded rice field. She slipped on a wet rock. Balloon. Echo. Here I am.
I think the fact that Burt could hold his own and more with Anna Magnani, Shirley Booth, Kate Hepburn was indicative of the man. When we did The Rainmaker, Kate Hepburn too, they were both larger than life. And they were both willing to step out and take chances that a lot of us more retiring or shy actors are often afraid to do.
I'm sick and tired of this. I'm tired of you queering my work, calling me out of my name.
I told you what you are, a big-mouthed liar and a fake.
How do you know I'm a liar? How do you know I'm a fake? Maybe I can bring rain.
And then that great, gorgeous scene in the tack room when he tells Kate that she's pretty with such sensitivity.
Now close your eyes. Close them. Now say, I'm pretty.
I can't.
Say it, Lizzie. Say it.
I'm ready.
Say it again.
Ready.
Say it. Mean it.
I'm ready. I'm pretty. I'm pretty.
Hecht Hill Lancaster and its predecessors, Hecht Norma and Hecht Lancaster, were an incredibly positive force in the emergence of independent film production companies that were owned by actors, directors, and other creative people. Now, Burt's was not the first of these ventures, but it was by far the most successful. The early films, the films that featured Burt as the swashbuckler in these very lighthearted, colorful adventures like The Flame and the Arrow and 10 Tall Men and The Crimson Pirate, were highly successful pictures. Vera Cruz was an enormous box office hit, and Trapeze was the biggest hit of all.
Trapeze, the wonder show of the world, with the wonder cast of the world. Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, Gina Lollobrigida, directed by Carol Reed, produced by James Hill.
Burt had a tendency to want to help other people. And one of the people he wanted to help was Tony Curtis, because Tony is what I would call a natural-born actor. And Carol said to me once the shot was over, he said, I'm never going to get the shot unless he quits coaching it.
Tell her the price you put on her. Tell her how you said anybody could have her. Anybody you said because she was a cheap little.
Well, Burt continued to coach him, and finally Carol came to me and said, look, I'm not going to take any more from this fellow. I'm going to tell him off in front of the whole company. Well, God, I didn't look forward to that, but I said to Carol finally, let me tell you what I'm going to do, Carol. I'm going to back you up. Well, Carol laughed so hard that ended that. But that is an insight into Burt. He worried about everybody in the show, and he worried about everybody in life.
Gunfight at the OK Corral. Burt had agreed to do the picture, even though it was basically Kirk's picture, because the part of Doc Holliday was a much more exciting part than Wyatt Earp. And I think Burt agreed to do it because he wanted to do that and The Rainmaker to wash up his commitments with Wallace. Then he would be on his own.
Burt Lancaster as the famous Wyatt Earp. Kirk Douglas as the notorious Doc Holliday.
Two men as different as day and night.
Get going down the back stairs.
I enjoyed watching the byplay between Kirk and Burt. They seemed to enjoy each other tremendously.
Be in Dodge City and thank you properly.
You can thank me properly by staying out of Dodge City.
Kirk is always seemed to me to be one of those actors who had a lot of angst.
That's smart.
You felt like Kirk could explode at any moment.
You are dirt, just like me.
Burt seemed much easier, much more pulled back, much more laid back.
Kirk is a very dear friend of mine, and we've done 6 pictures together. And we have a lot of controversy and conflict when we work, because he's very much like me. He's conceited. He tries to tell me how to act. I try to tell him how to act. And it goes this way. And strangely enough, out of this kind of feuding and fighting and fussing has come a great respect and mutual love that we've gained.
The difference in the acting styles between Kirk and Burt, interestingly enough, 2 strong men, 2 powerfully dominant men who had different approaches. Burt was, I felt, more aware and gave out more to his leading lady or his leading actor. When Burt looked at you and Burt responded to you or Burt gave you the dialogue, you were in that scene. It was real. And it was like a beautiful tennis match you had playing with a good partner. It was magic. And the love scenes, well, all I can tell you is that I have done love scenes and been kissed by some of the most stunning, handsome, gorgeous Hollywood male stars in the business. And it's been wonderful. But let me tell you something, when you've been kissed by Burt Lancaster, you have been kissed.
By 1956, the 3 partners, Burt, Harold, and Jim Hill, were riding very high. At the same time, in 1955, their company had produced a very small black and white picture with Ernest Borgnine and Betsy Blair.
I had done the television original 1-hour version of Marty, written by Patty Chayefsky. Harold Hecht identified with the character of Marty greatly and wanted to do it as a film. No television script had ever been adapted for the films. He wanted to do it. He bought the rights from Patty.
Marty won the Oscar for Best Picture. An Actors Independent Production Company had never, ever made such an achievement before. Well, Marty was a blessing, but in a way it was also kind of a curse, because now Hecht, Hill, Lancaster saw themselves not just as producers of entertainment, but producers of serious, dramatic fare, some of which starred Burt and some of which didn't.
Harold bought a property that I happened to mention to him, and the next thing he bought it. That was Harold. And it was The Sweet Smell of Success. And I couldn't have been more excited because the first person I got was Clifford Odets to do a rewrite of the script. And it's as fine a writing as he ever did in his life. Now, I didn't know what Burt's reaction would be, but he came back to me and said, I think I'd like to play Hunsaker. Well, I tell you, he could have knocked me over with a feather, because that was so far from anything he had done up until then.
Burt Lancaster as J.J. Hunsaker, world-famed columnist whose gossip is gospel to 60 million readers. Tony Curtis as Sidney Falco, the kid who had ideas about taking over.
But we happen to know I'm your star pupil, because I reflect back to you your own talent. I'd hate to take a bite of you. You're a cookie full of arsenic.
The idea of doing The Sweet Smell appealed to Burt, surely because the part was so foreign to anything that he played or was to play. It's so typical of him that he never came to me and said, what do you think this will do to my career? I never heard him ever say that about anything that he did. He just said, I want to do it.
And here you are out in the open, where any hip person knows that this one is toting that one around for you.
I thought Tony Curtis was fantastic. And Burt saw to it that he was fantastic because he knew that it was really Tony Curtis's picture.
J.J., please. Look, I can explain.
Why you put your hands on my sister.
J.J.
I didn't do do anything.
Stop!
But in its day, in the mid-50s, pictures like Sweet Smell of Success were not what Americans went to the box office to see. And from that point, Hecht Hill Lancaster began to experience ever increasing financial difficulties. At the same time, the company continued to acquire properties, continued to grow, continued to make more pictures, and to spend money as if the heyday was in full flower.
No woman in my house.
How much? Woman worth?
There are not enough horses to pay for her. Not all you can own, or all you can steal.
Adante!
And the whole mess finally caught up with them, and the company died very quietly and very quickly in 1959.
Sin, sin, sin. You're all sinners. You're all doomed to perdition.
I had a friend of mine who lived in 106th Street, and he and I were pals from the time we were 15, 16 years of age.
What the hell's the big idea?
When I did Elmer Gantry, I got a letter from him, and he said, Burt, he said, that's the first time I've seen you act like you used to act when you were a kid in the streets, full of the old devil and baloney and so forth and so on. I loved that part.
Elmer Gantry is an all-American boy. He's interested in money, sex, and religion. I'd like to tear those holy wings off you, make a real woman out of you. I'd show you what heaven's like. No golden stairways or harp music or silvery clouds.
He was a favorite with my mother. That's what I thought was wonderful. He only had one tie, and he would, the night that he got his Oscar, he came by to ask her if everything matched that he was wearing. The tie especially. She said, "You don't have another tie, Burt? Well, we'll make it match. I'll get one of Jimmy's father's shirts." And that's what he wore the night that he won the Oscar.
And the winner is Burt Lancaster and Elmer Gantry.
When he got it for Elmer Gantry, really everything that we had worked with and he had worked with had come to pass. I mean, there is truly the villainy is moonlight. He made you love Elmer Gantry.
Burt Lancaster was always the way we remember Burt Lancaster. I mean, he was a real force on screen, and he was like that in his personal life. I like a lot of people was sort of in awe of him. He was an extraordinary physical specimen to begin with. He looked like a statue that some great sculpture had made. He was always you know, a little taller than everybody else, a little better built than everybody else. He used to wear the most inexpensive clothes. Like he had a pair of khaki pants, he wore them forever. One pair of khaki pants and one coat that was a kind of a Harris tweed that he called his 1,000-miler. And there was always a tie stuffed into the top pocket of the jacket. He'd walk into 21, he'd take the tie out, tie it around his neck and make a nice knot, and he'd walk in and he looked classier and more elegant than anybody in the room.
I remember once passing him when he was sitting in his dressing room, and he was reading a book that I had read, and I stopped to discuss it with him. I said, "Do you read much?" He said, "Well, I try to get through a book every day." You know, that's incredible. I was very impressed with that.
Burt was very private, and he wasn't really one to go to all the functions and the parties. He was a pretty quiet man. In fact, one memory I have of him, oftentimes we would be at his beach house or somewhere. I'd walk in the room, he wouldn't know I was coming in the room or something, and often he'd be sitting, I mean usually, he'd be sitting on a chair with a bathrobe on reading with classical music. I mean, that's probably how I best remember him.
He never became a part of the Hollywood inner circle. I don't remember Burt ever inviting any studio executive or anybody else like that over to his house.
He hated premieres. He hated really talking to the press. When he was married for many years to Norma, the mother of his children, they kept very quietly living in their home in Bel Air. He loved his children and was a good father. He had 5 kids.
There's 3 girls and 2 boys, Jimmy and Billy, Susan, Sheila, and Joanne. Jimmy is the oldest, is married to my cousin Annie, as a matter of fact.
His major passion was bridge. Almost every Saturday night, there was a major bridge game going on over at the Lancaster house.
Burt would show up in this big brown Cadillac, and I think he would just honk, and my dad would go out there, and the 2 of them would jog in the mornings.
Just because he became a famous movie star, it didn't change the fact that Nick Cravat was still his friend. Burt had a better sense of who he was than almost any man I know. And because of that, there was nothing that I know that he was afraid of. He knew exactly who he was, and he was comfortable with it. So he didn't have to change when he became a movie star.
He was also involved in his time and in the politics of his generation. And he told me that he was making a movie in Paris at the time, and he had gathered about 2,000 signatures of either Americans working in Paris or expatriates, and had brought it to Washington to give to Martin Luther King as a symbolic gesture of support. But he had come over specifically to participate in this famous Civil Rights March.
And what makes his willingness to participate doubly endearing is the fact that he had a terrible fear of flying. He did almost anything he could to avoid flying. So the fact that he would be willing to get on a plane and fly from Paris to Washington and go back on a plane the very next day shows where his heart really lay.
I read a screenplay called Go Tell the Spartans by Wendell Mays. Because of the Vietnam open wound, most of the studios stayed away from it. I thought that Burt would be a terrific choice. She said, send the script down, so I sent it down. 2 days later, he called back to say, I love this script. I said, Burt, wait a minute, before you come up, you know, we have a budget which is very low. In fact, this particular budget is all your salary. I don't think we'll be able to make a connection with your agent on that. He said, don't you worry about that. Money has nothing to do with it. I want to do this picture, period. When we rented a little motel across the street from the location, he'd wake up at 5:30 in the morning, and there would be a knock on the window, 5:36 in the morning, and I could see his eye sticking through a little slit in the curtain. He wanted to talk to me, and I'd get up and open the door. I said, anything wrong? He says, no, I'm so happy with this script. Let's sit down and talk about it. That's exactly what we do.
Burt was never egotistical, and he had everything to be egotistical about. I mean, he had a great brain, good looks, highly intelligent, and he was a great actor. He always wanted to stretch his horizons. I mean, you remember, Burt never stopped working.
Burt was a kind of a permanent student, a permanent and I don't know what the right adjectives are. I want to say voracious or obsessive.
They call him the Birdman, and he is the most defiant man alive. During the 43 years he spent in solitary confinement, this amazing man did not break bread with another human being. Yet, out of defiance and sheer strength of will, taught himself in a prison cell half a dozen languages and mastered the intricacies of a score of scientific subjects. An accomplishment to stagger the imagination.
You know, I think I've got you figured out, Shoemaker. First day I came here, you as much as asked me to get down on my knees and whimper. I wouldn't do it then, and I won't do it now. I won't lick your hand, and that's what eats you, ain't it, Keeper? Well, you keep this in mind. A man ain't whipped until he quits, and I'll never give you that pleasure. Get out of here.
Occasionally, a role and a picture are so impressive that we behind the camera want to shout about it from the rooftops. I have just been privileged to work in such a picture. The film is The Leopard from the celebrated bestseller, and it provides one of the most challenging roles it's ever been my good fortune to portray.
He even had me come to Sicily to look over everything because he was terribly taken up with Visconti, and he had a relationship like he never had with anybody before. He was like a little kid. He was taking me around the set, and he showed me his bedroom. Then he opened drawers in the dresser to show me that they were all filled with the kind of gear and kind of clothes that a man would wear at that time. I said, well, where do you show that in the film? Oh, we don't show that, he said, but that's Visconti's way. He goes to those lengths. That's how much like a little kid Burt still was about his trade.
Burt Lancaster, for many years, had been accused by critics as someone who didn't get underneath the skin of his characterizations, that it was rather sort of thin and not well developed and one-notey. He took that criticism quite seriously and began to really look into himself and try to find out what it was that he had to do in order to improve himself, in order to develop in a way in which there would be more nuances, more shadings, more colors, more life added to the character he was doing.
I remember he called me once from the road where he was playing the lead in Knickerbocker Holiday, singing September Song, the role that Walter Houston made so famous. And I remember the glee with which he said to me, "The critics are killing me. They're just ripping me apart, and I really deserve it. I was really bad in this thing, but I'm getting better. I'm getting better all the time." He was fearless about that.
Burt's background as an acrobat, the physicality of that, the release through action, through activity, was perhaps a kind of symbol of a large part of his career, the striving, always onward and always kind of upward, seeking new fields to conquer. Comes right out of the character of Trapeze, the triple somersault that was the center of that story. I think you could use that as a metaphor for Burt's career.
Burt was always conscious of, no matter how placid the scene may have been, or how flat the scene may have been, his job was to unflatten it and pump it full of yeast and make it rise, which is what he did with Atlantic City.
What do you do when you watch me?
I look at you. You take off your blouse, then you run the water. Then you take a bottle of gold perfume and you put it on the sink. Then you slice the lemons. You open a box of blue soap. You run your hands under the water to feel the temperature. And you take the soap in your hands and
if you look at his career, you will see that he would do one or two very commercial movies, and then he would absolutely stick his neck out a mile. He was always doing something that was a little bit risky, and he alternated this way. He'd do one that was a big action picture, the kind of Burt Lancaster movie that you would expect him to do, and then he'd really stick his neck out and try something.
I think the most distinctive thing about him was the way he selected his material. At the time that I had done Local Hero, which was 1982, he was, I think, 69. He had probably done 82, 85 movies. He was a star from his first film. And he said he did one for the Pope and one for him. Whether it was doing something like Atlantic City or The Leopard or Local Hero, he could sustain it by doing major Hollywood films. The director and the writer, who's a Scottish fellow named Bill Forsyth, who's from Glasgow. This was his first movie pretty much with adults. He wrote the part for Burt Lancaster. There's a scene in Local Hero where his character, Happer, has arrived on a helicopter, and I'm leading him along these cliffs back to the hotel. Well, the scene was shot at sunset when the light is just about to drop. And I was watching Lancaster talking to the director, Bill Forsyth. And he was sort of saying something like this. All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to look to my left, and then I'm going to put my arm around McIntyre, and I'm going to gesture to the sky. and then perhaps I'll look out to the sea. And after Burt finished talking, Bill said, I think a wee bit less. And Lancaster, without missing a beat, says, all right, how about this? And he went on to describe a whole other approach to the same scene. And this went on, and Bill said again at the end when he was done, I think a wee bit less. And at the end of the movie, they gave him a party. They gave Lancaster a party. And he made a beautiful speech about his experience in Local Hero and how hard it is to find such a wonderful script. And he wanted to thank the director, who, in his words, spoke no known language.
I'm a pain in the neck. I try to direct the picture. I try to tell the other actors how to act. People hate me, and when it's all over, they wind up loving me. I don't know why.
I mean, he was larger than life anyway. I don't think you could ever take it away from him. But he never seemed afraid to let somebody else step into the limelight or take the spotlight away from him.
Burt had such a variety, tremendous variety of roles, and he just played the heck out of every one of them, and you believed him. Any time Burt was in a film, you want to go see it. Anytime he's on television, you want to watch it. That's the magic, the magnetism that he had.
It seemed like he never forgot where he was from, which is rare in most people. Most people are trying to run away from where they're from. He was proud of his background. He was reverential about the people who influenced him in his life. And I think that's why people like him so much, because I think they see in him themselves. It still seemed like he was from the audience. He didn't seem apart from the audience, he seemed from the audience. And that's not an easy thing to do for an actor in general, and especially for an actor who works in such a large way.
I think the uniqueness of Burt Lancaster's persona is that he could be to everybody whatever they wanted him to be. He could be the poet, he could be with great wisdom and soul, he could be the athlete, the acrobat, the Western star riding the plains with Kirk Douglas. He could be whatever you want him to be, because he was everything. He encompassed it all. He was an actor.